I would like to start by talking about the vision. And the vision for our building that we are in tonight really goes back centuries, as you know, and it goes back to the original friars. And the original friars had a vision to live out and to proclaim the good news of Jesus. And they also were focused on caring for the poor and the marginalized and the vulnerable. And this building, which we are now sitting in, came at a great cost. There was a sacrifice made to provide this building, a sacrifice in terms of time, a sacrifice in terms of money, and a sacrifice in terms of prayer. And you and I, we have enjoyed this building over many, many years, and you will all have your own special memories, particularly at the moment, as it's been so long since we've been in this building together. But we have to remember first and foremost that a huge sacrifice was made for this building. And this building, which was originally constructed in 1311, was the base for mission for those friars into Reading and its surrounding areas. And our vision now, as you know, is to see Reading transformed by Jesus. And in many ways, it's similar to the original vision. And we talk about the importance of equipping the congregation, reaching out in mission and resourcing. And everything that we do through Greyfriars and of course New Hope, but particularly thinking of Greyfriars and this site, impacts the building. We're allowed to do things because of this building. We're limited in part because of the site and the buildings that we have. But I want us to at least start with this sense of the building is a base for mission, and the building is also a place for mission. And what I mean by that is we come together on a Sunday and we then go out into our communities and further afield to be God's missioners in the places where we work and live. But we also use this site as a base for mission for the many different ministries that take place during the week and on Sundays. And of course, that's changing as we think about our parish, which is changing dramatically at the moment. We're going to have 5,000 new employees moving into the area with Station Hill Complex, and 1,800 new apartments or homes being provided. So we actually, in God's timing, come to this redevelopment project at a critical moment in the life of Reading, when it is going through a huge transformation. Station Hill Complex, we've got Iceland, which is being rebuilt just the other side of the roundabout. So as you know, Reading is a building site at the moment. And the heart of what we're trying to do is to change our church here from what has looked a bit like an imposing welcome from the front of the West End and the turret that was above the kitchen, to something that is much more open and light and welcoming, somewhere where we can really see the life of the church with the bookshop and the cafe. And it's a place where we really want to grow in fellowship and faith. And we're going to be exploring that a little bit more as we go through this evening. So finally, before I hand over to Chris, I wanted to say, as a summary really, that in terms of the vision, our building is a place where we grow in fellowship and faith. It's a base for mission and outreach, and it's a resource for the wider church. And as we partner with organisations and other churches together, we see Reading transformed by Jesus. So that's really the vision. And Chris is going to talk us through now where we've got to so far. So we should have some slides that are going to come up. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, David, and good evening, everybody. It's nice to be with you. I'm hopeful that it isn't me that's jinxed the technology tonight, although it did work in practice. So this slide, before we go into prayer, just to commit our evening together to God, this slide just summarises where we are at the moment. I'm going to explain the scheme in more detail in the second section, but just to say that when we talk about phase one, it is the area edged red on this plan in front of you. It includes the 2 Sackville Street houses. It includes what we know as the West End, the car park, and the current toilet blocks. And there'll be more about that later. Phase 2, when we talk about it, is the area encased in green, and that is a replacement of the centre, and then a physical link block between the church and the new centre. And where we are on phase 1 is we're pleased to say we're fully funded with the cash in the bank. We have let the building contract to a company called Ash Contracting Limited. Ash are a small to medium-sized contractor. They turn over about 20 million a year. They're based in Kent and Guildford, and they work largely for the education sector, the church sector, and charity sector. As David said, the works are going to start on the 20th of July, and they have an 11-month delivery program for phase 1. And so we intend to be back into the new phase 1 facilities in June of 2021. Phase 2, which we had to separate because we had some planning problems. We now have a resolution to grant planning, so we don't actually have the planning permission, and we're still discussing a few niceties around the permission. And we don't have all the funding for that either, but we will be explaining that later. So David, I think you're going to suggest that we go into a prayer group, groups just to reflect on how we've got to this point and to give thanks for the future.
Yeah, so we'd love to encourage you to take some time now to pray in small groups. And we've got a slide that's coming up that gives some suggestions. But I think it's always good, isn't it, to start with prayers of thanks. So I want to encourage you in your small groups to pray thanks for the buildings that we've had over the generations and the ways in which faithfully members of Greyfriars have gone out and taken the gospel, the good news of Jesus. We want to give thanks for the ways in which people have served through Greyfriars. They've served the people of Reading and done that in a variety of different ways. And then giving thanks for God's timing, God's provision, that he's got us to this point where we can finally say that the building work is going to start on Monday. So we're going to pop you into small groups when you'll be unmuted, and just like Kingdom Come on Tuesday evenings, we'll take a few minutes to pray through this, to give thanks to God, and then we'll join back together in a few minutes. Welcome back. Thank you for praying, giving thanks. We're going to have another couple of opportunities to pray. So having talked through the vision, Chris is now going to lead us through the scheme as it stands today. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, David. So John is going to work the slides in the background. So this first slide just shows the curtilage of the Greyfriars site. For those of you who are not familiar, and there are some new people on the call tonight, this is quite a constrained site. The proximity of the Sackville Street houses is always a challenge to the scale and mass of anything you put on the site. The presence of the houses is too close to the north side of the church. That's where the toilets are, for us to have proper toilet facilities and proper support facilities. And as David's alluded to, whilst it was clearly considered appropriate at the time, the West End has become too small and is not particularly inviting. We took the opportunity when it arose 18 months ago, John, to buy the 2 houses on Sackville Street, which were closest to the church. And you can see those highlighted in red. On the next slide, I just reiterate then how those houses allow us to encroach further to the north in the redesign of phase 1. And John, if you can just remind us, phase 1 is that area, including the houses, and phase 2 we've talked about before. So if we go on to the next slide. So phase 1 is built around a new open plan foyer situated in the location of the current West End building. As you see from the picture on the bottom right, this is a planar glass building. So when you build alongside a grade 1 listed building, you either have to go very contemporary or very similar. The current structure draws its references from the original flint and stone. This has gone more to contemporary. So it's a glass planar foyer, and it has stone enclosures flanking the entrances. The entrance you see is the new west entrance, and therefore it's in line with the aisle of the church, just to centre that on the drawing. The next slide shows the entrance from Friar Street. So at the moment we use the door on Friar Street, which is used for weddings and funerals often, and is actually set within the Grade 1 listed building. This door is now going to be a new opportunity for people to come straight into the foyer. The third photograph shows the new windows and door, which goes straight under the west wall, the west window, which is at the back of church, and will allow communication directly from the foyer straight up the aisle into church. This requires quite a bit of careful engineering to form this, and it will be one of the early tasks that the contractor does. And the final photograph on here just shows that we've included where the green arrow points, another door and connecting way, and this is to give direct access for children, youths, etc., as they move from the church building to the centre. This will be unlinked until we build, uncovered until we build phase 2, and then covered as part of phase 2. So if we can go to the next slide, the foyer itself is designed to be an open space with an integrated coffee shop and bookshop, and it's to facilitate fellowship, resourcing and mission. The first photos on the right show you how the coffee shop might look. So the coffee shop is going to be situated to the right as you come in that in the southeast corner. The photograph on the top is St Anne's Church at Woodford Wells, and is actually a very similar type of coffee counter against a Grade 1 listed building structure. But the thing that is different here is that we do have the opportunity to have the bookshop bleeding into the coffee shop, and then as the next photos show, and the left-hand side, to have the coffee shop bleeding into the bookshop. Now, David, I know you've been very excited about this particular part of the development. Do you want to just share your vision for it?
Yeah, so whenever we've been praying about this section of the building, talking about it, planning, the words of Jesus keep coming into my mind of Jesus when he says he wants us to have life and life in all its fullness. And one of the great things we rejoice in the life of Greyfriars is it is full of life. We've got lots of children and youth and students and adults of all ages. But one of the sadnesses is I know so many people who walk past this building and they don't really get to see in. They're unaware of what is going on inside the building. So what excites me about this new front to the church is that it is visible, it's transparent, and we want it to be a place that really is a window, if you like, into the life of the church, showing the life of the ministries and the mission of this church. And so we expect it to be a welcoming place, a light place, a safe space for people to come and be prayed for. We can use the space for courses in the evenings. The church will be open during the day, so people will be able to see straight in and come straight in through this glass foyer. And it'll be a place where people can come and just spend their lunch times, have a cup of coffee and work from the cafe, or just sit and talk, or come in and meet with one of the congregation or one of the team and receive some prayer, buy a book, get some recommendations if they're struggling in their lives. So again, it's just that real sense of it demonstrating and giving some transparency to the life that Jesus brings in and through Greyfriars.
Thanks. So John, if we can just move on to the next slide. So for some reason, David was very keen that I explained where the toilets were. And if we just move on, John, you'll see that from the entrance space, all blue arrows move toward the back of the new Sackville Street houses, which now form part of the scheme. And the centre diagram shows that you arrive at the back of the houses, and we're building on the where the lean-to originally would have been on the back of the house. We're taking that down and building a new toilet block with a sort of glazed entrance area over it. And I think for those of you who are familiar with the current toilets, this approximately has 2.5 times the amount of facilities, and is, I've put right-sized here because our current facilities are woefully inadequate for the sort of scale of congregational events that we have. So this is suitably sized, and when you move past the toilets, you come to what will be a dedicated prayer room in the ground floor of number 2. And in the ground floor of number 4, we've left the reception with a door onto Sackville Street, and we'll explain why later. John, if you want to just give us the next bit. The Sackville Street houses then have 2 upper floors. They're both pretty identical. And you can see that the first scheme, into which we have to decant all the staff eventually from the porter cabin and from the current centre before we can replace the centre. We'll have 6 offices with 2 to 3 desks in each of those offices. So that's how, in the short term, that we will facilitate the gradual decant and replacement of the facilities. But the long-term vision for that space, David, do you want to just share that?
Yeah, so as you all know, there are lots of really good Christian charities in Reading doing amazing work, and we partner with them in different ways. Many of you are involved in their work. Some of you are giving generously to their work. We as a church donate money to many of them. But one of the struggles that lots of them face is because of costs of the premises in Reading, they're forced to have their offices outside of Reading or on the very outskirts. And part of our vision is we know that we cannot do everything we want to do on our own. So we need to do it in partnership with others. And what's really exciting about this part of the building is that the longer term, we want to offer at a very cheap rent a space for Christian charities to come and use Sackville Street as a base. And so they would be able to have their staff there, to receive some of their customers there if they're doing counselling or helping the poor and the vulnerable. And what works really well, as you can see on this diagram, is that on one side, the lower end, if you like, of the diagram you're looking at, the premises are connected to the church. But on the other side at the top, there is independent access. So it allows for these charities to have a more confidential, private access for any of the people who they're working with to come into their premises. And I know already of at least half a dozen organisations who I think would be really excited at the prospect of being able to use a space like this. And again, it's part of us resourcing the wider church, but it is also key as we join with these organisations in mission to reach out to Reading.
Yeah, that's very exciting, David. Thank you. So, John, can we have the next slide, please? So this just shows a picture of the external works, and I just thought by reference to a plan that if John just brings up the first area, just to explain that the area shaded green will be the first area that is completed at the same time as the foyer, so that when the church opens, we have full use of that space. Now, it has a flat, new disabled space adjacent to the foyer. I have to say our facilities for disabled drivers have been terrible over the years. And the next area just shows the lower part of the car park, which will, John, be re-tarmacked but not finished, because obviously otherwise we will just damage it as we deliver phase 2. And the area shaded blue that's just about to come up, these are the 2 areas which, if phase 2 doesn't proceed with continuity on the end of phase 1, that we will have to put a temporary finish in at the cost of something like £40,000. But if we can get continuity of delivery, we wouldn't put that in, and you'll see what we would put in a moment. So the next slide comes on to show phase 2. So when we talk about the link block, it's really that area with a red circle around it in the middle. And the link block is really a glazed continuity strip between the foyer and the centre, and it has to take out the level change in the car park. So halfway down it has some steps and a platform lift. We have to retain a separate access and entrance way to the centre for VAT purposes, believe it or not. And on that basis, we shouldn't pay any VAT on the delivery of the centre, which is important. John, do you want to show us the next slide? So the entrance to the centre is very unlike what we have now once you get through the doors. So we will have 5 metre height, almost double storey entrance area, great reception space, good for fellowship, good for breakout, for coffee and light, for for the congregation should we have events. But also this whole area would be very good for weddings and wedding receptions and the like. And again, it's trying to build connections with the community. The next photos show that the hall is now orientated east-west rather than north-south. And it will have some breakout meeting rooms within it. And we're just reflecting on just how much breakout space we need with the children's work at the moment. And in many ways, this is to cater for the needs of the children's work, which have not really been very well served over the last 10 years by the current facilities. We've outgrown them completely. So the next slide then just shows very quickly what the upper floors are like. So there's 2 upper floors. The first coloured area in the bottom left, John, is the centre, what will be the centre offices for Greyfriars staff, with a couple of small meeting rooms for any confidential meetings, etc. The next colouring shows what will be meeting rooms that are suitable for youth, for all the different meetings we have during the week, and for the hire out with all the partners that do hire our buildings. And the hiring potential for these buildings is considerable, and it builds that network and relationship with a lot of the businesses who already come and use our space from time to time. And the final main space in the centre will be on the top floor, and this is described as a lounge and a meeting room. And what we're conscious is, as we lose the West End, we do lose a lot of the social space that we have together, and that this will be an opportunity for the more informal meetings that take place, and the informal groups that need that don't need the formality of a meeting room, but do need space to meet together. John, if we can have the final slide. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, we did discuss environmental stewardship. So I just thought it was worth a quick slide to explain that within the consents, these buildings are going to be delivered at the very minimum of BREEAM Very Good. I don't propose to say what that is, other than it drives you towards sustainable buildings. Both phases have solar PV on the roof, and this renewable energy will help us to keep the bills down considerably. As you'd expect, they're well insulated and very airtight, and that's unlike the facilities we've had here for many years. And there's a lot of controls on the heating and lighting systems. Reading's Council's view of a sustainable future involves less car parking, and so the new facilities do have about 2/3 of the current parking until we build phase 2, and then the current parking will halve as we complete the development. And there is a green travel plan, which as occupiers we will have to sign up to, which encourages all of us to get on our bikes and to use what will be new bicycle storage on site. And of course, we'll be putting in showers and things for people who do use those facilities to get to work or to minister. So that is a very quick canter through the scheme. John, if you want to give us the next slide. I think at that point we were going to break for questions, any questions that might come through on the chat line, and just give David and myself the opportunity to fill in any blanks that are important to you tonight. Yeah.
So if you would like to, please use the chat field on Zoom and put in some questions. We'll take some of them now and some of them sort of over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes. And just while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I thought it might just be worth adding in terms of the centre. I've talked over the last 5 years, 4.5 years now, about the importance of us building bridges with the community in Reading. And this new centre building, phase 2, it does present us with more facilities to help us. I mean, for example, our youth are currently not, well, they're not meeting in church at all, as you know, but in normal times, they're not able to meet on site here. So the youth have been meeting at St. Lawrence. And it doesn't really help us at all that they have to get marched down Friar Street every Sunday morning. So we will have more space, not only to carry out the ministries of the church that we have today, but also to grow, because we're trying to build buildings for the future. But it, perhaps even more importantly, helps us as we seek to build bridges to the community. And so, again, I'm just really looking forward to the ways in which these buildings can help us as we try and build bridges to organisations in the town, to institutions. The police have often said they would really welcome sort of using this as a base, but there just hasn't been enough room. So everything we're doing is about trying to build bridges for the kingdom of God into the community. So I'm going to try and pick up some of the questions. So have we got some? Here's one. Mel Bright has sent one question. What is the accessibility like, re ease of wheelchair use? Are there ramps, steps, width of doorways? Chris, do you want to have a go at that?
Yes, so we have actually consulted with a group who would be deemed to represent people who recognise what disability challenges there are in buildings, such as Grade 1 listed buildings. And within the new facilities, we've got platform lifts where we have small gradients to get down so that people are not having to use ramps in the main. Within the centre, we've built in 2 lifts where one lift might have done, but the second one is just in case you have a breakdown and then any disabled users within the building wouldn't be able to get themselves vertically up through the building. We've got level accesses for the disabled car parking spaces, and the doorways are wider, as you say, and there are disabled toilets on each floor of the buildings, I think really it's been well catered for.
Thank you, Chris. Maybe related to that, how many disabled car parking spaces are there?
There will be 2 in the scheme, which is the standard at Reading Borough Council encourage.
Thank you, Chris. Jane Clark asks, has there been any consideration of the use of the building in a post-COVID world where the virus is endemic and more people work remotely? And in the first phase of our planning for this building, particularly for the new centre, we had prepared a space for co-working. As you know, in Reading, well, across the country, there are more and more people working from home. There'll be even more now, as you say, Jane. And we decided that rather than having a dedicated space for co-working, we're going to try and have a more flexible approach. So we've got some staff offices. We've also got some of the spaces Chris highlighted in the diagrams you've just seen. But I think one role we can play as the church is to help draw people into community, out of isolation. And so it very much is in our hearts and our sites to try and see if we can bring people together here on site. Those who are either Christian part of the church working on their own at home, or perhaps not in church and would like to use this space. Now we've got another question here. Thinking about Bed for the Night 2021. This is Linda Flintoff. Given that phase 1 will be under construction, how will this affect us hosting Bed for the Night as we usually do? So we
can still be in the centre.
Yeah, it can still be in the centre, Linda. So we will do this. It's one of the reasons for us doing this in phases, because it was almost impossible for us to maintain any level of life in the church if we were to do this whole thing in one go. So part of the rationale for 2 phases is it allows the centre to remain while we're working on this end, and then vice versa. So the answer is it would continue down in the centre. Now, if you have a burning question, please do type it in. We'll just give you a minute or so. We're going to come back to opportunities for questions. So we're going to turn, I think what we'll do is we'll turn to a time of prayer now. Is that right?
Yep.
So if we could have the slide, please, John. We're going to go into our little groups again and pray. And so we've got some suggestions here. Praying for the new space, that it would help grow fellowship and the ministries of the church for different age groups. Pray that the facilities would help us build new bridges into the community to be missional and to reach out. And then if we could go back, please. The last one is to pray that these premises would help resource the wider church. Having talked about the hub for Christian charities, we want to see the kingdom of God grow in Reading, don't we? This is what we're about. So let's get into small groups and pray together for a few minutes. Welcome back. As we were praying, there was one more question that's come in from Graham. Is reopening the church for worship compatible with the project, knowing that we're going to knock through from the foyer and that will be disruptive? The constructors are going to make a hole under the west window very early on in the works. So, I mean, everything changes every week, as you know, with what's happening in the nation. But our expectation is that we can get the majority of the disruptive work done before, God willing, we can enter back into the building. Now, we're aiming to finish, just so you all know, about 9:05. Sorry, it's a bit later than planned, but that was my fault with the technology at the beginning. So Chris, over to you.
Yeah, John, can we just have this slide? So just in the context of this particular section, the little program here just shows you a snapshot of what we are setting out to achieve. And when we talk about funding and cost, it assumes this program, which is that we start in Q3, the redevelopment of phase 1. It takes us roughly 2 months to decant from the centre into the phase 1 facilities. And so within Q3 of 21, we will decant and demolish the centre. It would take just under 15 months to build phase 2, and therefore the handover would be pre-Christmas 2022. And that's a hostage to fortune if ever I heard one. And David, I think this area, this particular section is just to say that as we move forward, there are really 3 areas of need. There's the ongoing need for prayer. There's a couple of areas of participation that we would invite. And then it's just to give you an update on where we are with the funding. So David, I think you're going to just deal with the prayer section first.
Yep, so we've got on the next slide some suggestions of ways in which we'd love your prayer as we move forward. For wisdom for the redevelopment team, for the various phases as they begin on Monday, for safety, which is really key, including, I've written there, sort of patience for us all. I've said, I think before, that if we have any work done in our own homes, we know how disruptive it is, and we need to be patient. So just prayer that we would all be patient.
And can I just give an illustration of that?
Oh, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
On Monday, the car park locks will be changed and to the car park here. The contractor will take possession of the car park. So for all of us who are used to popping into town or popping into the offices, we will have to find other places to park from Monday.
Yeah. That includes the vicar, by the way. I don't get a special key. So prayers for Ash, the construction company, as they begin. And then I think most importantly, that what we do will bring glory to God. So please use this as a guide, and we'll obviously be sending out more prayer points, but we really need to pray as we enter into this phase of building and redevelopment.
So the second area of need, which we would bring to you, is that the cafe and the bookshop area. So there's a group at the moment who are a subgroup looking at this area. It's got Harvey, it's got Margaret Stone, it's got myself and Julian, and really there is the opportunity, and one might go as far as to say the need, for people that have the gifting, the desire, or the leading to be involved with that particular aspect of the redevelopment, to come and get on board. You could join that subgroup. It'll be the finishing off of the concept. It's meant to be a 6-day trading opportunity, and clearly there's a lot of work to go in putting the business plan together for that. Particularly, we want some creative space, and so there is an interior design opportunity. Clearly we can bring in resources from outside of the church if necessary, but if those skills exist within the church, we'd encourage you to come forward. And finally, if God lays on your heart that you might want to be involved with the future operation, either leading or managing some of these aspects of the redevelopment under and alongside Julian, then please put up your hand at this time, because there's nothing like shaping a future rather than just inheriting it once all the conceptual work's been done. And the second point that Harvey actually brought forward was his sort of desire that if you pray and think about the redevelopment, if you want to share with us on an email through comms@greyfriars.org.uk in the coming weeks, your vision for what, for how this might outwork in 5 years' time when the new facilities are in, then please feel free to do that. Finally, but last but not least, of course, just to give you an update on where we are with costs and funding. So phase 1, the construction contract is just under 2.55 million. We have some fees to pay for those people who represent us as we deliver the building. There's some fixtures and fittings outside of the build contract. There's a contingency both in the build contract and outside. This is a design and build contract, which is well detailed, and therefore we haven't felt the need to carry too large a contingency into the project. And then we have the opportunity to recover elements of VAT for building alongside a phase one listed building, but we still end up with a substantial VAT bill. So the total phase one costs are just over £3 million. As we sit here today, after £350,000 has been given through the tithe fund on contributions received to date to third-party charities such as Tier Fund and the like, we've got 3.48 million in the redevelopment account. So phase one is fully cash funded, and the PCC has given approval for the contract to be placed. The next slide gives us an indication of where we are on phase two. The latest very up-to-date cost plan, including contingencies at a greater level than we have in phase one at the moment, is just over 4 million, 4.25 million. We still have quite a lot of fees to pay ourselves to get into a contract with the contractor, and we have agreed a framework with the contractor within which we can negotiate phase two. We've already agreed their overhead and profit should we negotiate that, and then they would go open book on the tendering. We've allowances for fixtures and fittings. We do anticipate taking out a loan on the value of some of the properties that the diocese hold for the church, and we've been in discussion with the diocese about that, and there would be some interest on that loan, but it just allows us to repay some of the cost of the phase two over a longer period. There's not a large amount of VAT because the building will, with a separate entrance, be VAT zero rated for VAT. And then out of the remaining gifting, we would be making a further tithe funding, or we estimate we would, of about 350,000. So that total cost comes to 5.3 million. The funding in the bank at the moment, I can't see on my screen, but is by memory about 350,000, and the further pledges to date are 2.8 million and 2.795 million, and this is from a small number of people and a small number of trusts that we have already approached and who have committed funding but have not yet paid the money further to that pledge. And those total pledges to date against a cost of 5.3 amount to 3.1. So the final slide just summarises where we stand. If we're to get continuity of development between phase one and phase two, we need to raise a further £2.2 million. If we assume that some of that is gift aided at between 20 and 40%, then it's really a figure of around about 1.8 to 1.9 million pounds. We need to secure those pledges by January 21 if we're to press the button for the works to start in June with fully detailed design. So the PCC, we anticipate going back to the PCC at the end of January, the beginning of February, to say where we are with pledges and to take that decision as to whether we're in a position to press the button to go. If we're not, there will be abortive costs of finishing some of the areas that otherwise wouldn't be, we wouldn't have to finish if there was not any continuity, or if there was continuity, I apologise. Whilst we need the pledges for January 21, the actual cash into the bank account can come over 2.5 years. So we're reasonably well positioned for cash because we're already funded for phase one. And what that means is that we have this tax year and the next 2 tax years for those for whom giving is built around tax years, which that's the case for some people, in order for this money to actually be received into the fund. On the right here, you just get a screenshot of the relevant section of the Greyfriars website. For those of you who haven't been on recently, if you go onto the front page of the website, there is a redevelopment section down toward the lower section, the lower part. And that takes you into this giving section if you press on the appropriate button. And it explains how you can give now, or how you could pledge, or if you were minded perhaps to put a loan in to help spread along the period over which the funding can be repaid. Or if there's other creative ways that you may wish to discuss with us as to how you could put some funding in, then the website is set up to allow you to interact and to submit your thoughts. So that's a summary on where we are. David, I think you were, if we just go on to the last, very last slide, I think you were just keen to take any questions on that section.
Yeah, so we've got a few more questions which we'll try and answer now, and then we're going to go into our final prayer session before we draw to a close. So a few more questions have come in. The Booths, I think it's David, asks, if I can find it, will the final design of the foyer be the same as in the architect's computer pictures? My guess is yes and no, David, so I'm sure it will look very similar to that, but inevitably some of the finishes will be different, I'm sure.
Well, I think he has produced drawings and which show what the shell, the envelope and the shell and the windows look like. He hasn't been paid to put in it a real live coffee counter, a real live bookshop counter, proper shelving that will, so no, in the sense that it's very much a generic representation of the bookshop area and the coffee shop area. And that's where the interior design work will come in, and obviously the furniture selection and the way that the bookshop interacts with the coffee shop. So it doesn't get the essence of it over, it just provides the sort of framework.
Thank you, Chris. Now we might need to rattle through a few of these. We've got, given that Friar Street is a busy place with nightclubs, etc., what security is planned for the new glass centre and the bigger footprint?
That is quite a interesting question, and Julian is the man to answer that. But there is quite a comprehensive network of cameras, of control systems, of access control, and it is well looked at. It is well dealt with, and we've spent a lot of time with the contractor and the consultants looking into that particular aspect, because security will be an issue.
Thank you, Chris. Could there be space for displays of art in the foyer? And I think the answer to that is potentially.
Absolutely.
So one of the great things about that space is it is very spacious and could be great in the evening to invite people in, again, as a bridge to the community, to welcome people into church. So we would definitely consider that. Will there be a similar size room to the current West End that is more private, i.e. for the bereavement course? Asked Phil. And so in the new centre, we certainly have plans for a very similar size space. But even without that, there are other options within the centre that would provide for a more intimate and private, I'd say a bit more of a secure space as well. The West End, you know, we often have people peeking through the windows, and there was other things going on in the church. So there's much more appropriate rooms and spaces in the new centre. Alan asks, who is coordinating week-to-week, day-to-day prayer as we go through the next few months? Well, the answer is we've got Margaret Stone, who is on our redevelopment team, and Margaret is brilliantly coordinating our prayer as we move forward. So she will be helping us as we do that. And on that note, I think it would be great to go into our last prayer session. So John, if we could have that next slide, please. We're going to, for the last time, join our little prayer groups and pray for safety during the works. What does that mean? Understanding.
I think your patience.
Oh, is that
point.
My patience
Yeah.
point? Oh, I see. Yes, yes. Thank you, Chris. So safety and patience during the work. That God would lead forward those of you and others who have the relevant experience, as Chris said, to get involved in this project with the skills and gifts that you have. And finally, for the remaining funding, we need all of us, every single one of us, to be involved, to be giving as God leads us. We need God's provision. So let's go in our groups for the last few minutes and pray together. Very good. Welcome back again for the final time. Just before we draw to a close, there are a few things I wanted to say. Firstly, and I think you would all agree, if we have learned anything over the last 4 months during lockdown, it is how much we collectively miss gathering and seeing each other and being together and worshipping together and praying together. and looking at God's word together. And as we were preparing for tonight, just aware of if we ever thought, was there really a need for a building at all? Then I think the last 4 months has shown us how much we really appreciate the facilities we have, the privilege of being in the middle of Reading here. You know, hold that in your hearts. I hold it in my heart as we move forward over these next few weeks and months. The next thing to say is this session has been recorded. So if there's anyone you know who would like to see this but weren't able to join us tonight, we'll make sure it's posted probably on YouTube, and we'll try and get it onto the website as well. The next thing is just to point you again to the website. Chris mentioned it, greyfriars.org.uk/redevelopment. On there you can see the plans, the details for phase 1 and 2, the bit more about who's involved on the team, and some of the points Chris made about funding. And as we think about the team, I just want to say a huge thank you, particularly to 3 J's, as I call them, Jonathan, Julian, and Jim. And these gents, along with Chris, have done an amazing job. As the vicar, I always remember as I entered into this, someone who's very wise said, David, whatever happens, don't let redevelopment sink you as the vicar. And I just want to say publicly how thankful I am to this group for everything they're doing. They are working long hours, they're pouring everything they have into it. And collectively, we just want to say a huge thank you to all of you. And my last thing is to say thank you to you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your patience. I really hope it's been helpful, that you at least have a clearer sense of what begins on Monday and the exciting plans that we can look forward to. It will involve all of us being involved, praying, giving, and using the gifts that we have collectively. And I am really excited and very relieved that it's going to begin on Monday. So a massive thank you to you. Have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you from afar on Sunday. God bless you all. It's good night from the church.